Again, I thank the STEM and the Ideological Society for inviting such an important and such an apt discussion for today's day and age. Because really, for many people, Muslims and non-Muslims, the discussion regards to belief in a creator, belief does a God exist or not, is sometimes frowned upon. Firstly, some people say, you can never prove that a God exists, so why even attempt it? Other people may say, well, whether a God exists or not, I'm not going to change, because I'm good anyway. So, as a result, many people are put into the position of not actually thinking about one of the most fundamental questions of whether a creator exists or does not exist. And really for Muslims, because I'm a Muslim, and I'm going to speak from a Muslim basis, for a Muslim, we are told, and we in fact are ordered, to use the capacity of our mind, just like George Ellis has mentioned, using the mind, to base our belief, what we term in Arabic our iman, base it upon evidences. And this comes to the statement of Ibn Abbas, one of the famous companions of the Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. He said, the light of faith is built on thinking, is the thinking. And he understood that faith means the decisive belief built upon reality for which there is evidence. And in fact, this definition of faith was defined by the Muslim scholars 1,000 to 1,300 years ago. So when it comes to the issue that faith or belief is an emotional set of values, that's not how Muslim jurists and scholars actually understood their faith. They said the primary obligation upon a Muslim or a non-Muslim is to enter their belief through the use of the mind, establishing decisive belief. So inshallah, God willing, I'll be going over a number of things today with regards to the implications of the belief in the Creator, to discuss also the way to establish the belief, or what is the methodology of thinking, as also George Ellis has also touched upon, the proof of the Creator, or the various proofs that are brought forward, and also to discuss the conclusion of those arguments. So if we were to go on to the actual implications, then what we understand is this, is that the belief, in order to understand our purpose of life, we need to understand certain fundamental questions. For instance, is our purpose of life to live life to the max? Is our purpose of life to maximize sensual gratification? Or is it to be good? And in fact, what does good in fact mean? So these questions about the purpose of life can be answered by two simple questions, which is, for example, what comes before life? Where did I come from? And what's going to happen to us after we die? Or where are we going to? And to really appreciate this question, I want to give you a scenario. I want to give you an example of an individual, of a kid, of some, teenager, early 20s. He's at home, and his mother is ill. And then his friends come round and say to this person, to this kid, says, come, let's go out. Let's go to some nightclub. Let's go check out some girl. So now, he has a dilemma in his mind. What does he do? How does he make a decision? Should he look after his mother, or should he go out and check out some girl? This dilemma is solved by understanding your purpose of life. It forms a reference point. Because imagine if this person, this kid, he thinks that before life, that where I came from was nothing. I came from dust. And when I die, I go to dust. And so that this is my only life, so I better live it to the maximum. So therefore, he's going to decide upon what pleases him, or what's going to maximize his benefit, and what's going to minimize his pain. So he may think, forget my mother, leave her to be ill, I'm going to go out with my friends. Or he may be thinking, who's going to cook my dinner tomorrow? Who's going to have the biryani ready tomorrow if my mother's ill, so I'll look after my mother? The decision was made based upon benefit, because this was built upon how he viewed his purpose of life. And if you give the same scenario to the same person, but now he thinks before life he was created by a creator, and that after life he's going to be judged by a creator according to how he fulfilled his actions in that life, then his viewpoint towards life is different. So instead of saying what pleases me, what benefits me, he asks the question, what does the creator want me to do in this particular circumstance and this particular situation? And this question of answering the purpose of life, please, I don't want people here to think it's like a religious question. This is not a religious question. This question was answered by some of the philosophers of the past. People like John Stuart Mills, who developed the theory of utilitarianism, maximizing the benefit, minimizing the harm. The first question he asked was, can a creator exist or not? Or people like Adam Smith, who from his theories of economics, we have the Western liberal institutions established today. Or people like Karl Marx, who said, what is the purpose of life? He said, what comes before matter? Nothing. What comes after matter? Nothing. What is matter? Is eternal, and it evolves. So he answered that question, and then from answering that question, did he develop a theory on right and wrong, on morality, and therefore also on the function of society, economics, and politics. So discussing discussing the purpose of life by understanding whether a creator exists is something which every single individual must undertake. Every individual must understand for themselves what is their purpose of life. And therefore they must have a method or a particular way to understand how to establish their purpose. Now, what needs to be understood when we talk about the methodology or the way to establish a belief, whatever that belief is that we don't use blind or emotional following. It is not the case that I am an atheist, or I am a humanist, or I am a Hindu, or I am a Muslim because my parents were such and such. That type of mentality is something that Islam frowns upon, because each and every one of us has a responsibility to ourselves to establish our belief firmly and strongly. And so therefore we don't use blind emotional basis as a basis to decide the thoughts and the ideas that we want to take. So this leaves us two methodologies of thinking which have been touched upon by George Ellis as well. One which is called scientific thinking, or what's also known as empiricism. And now empiricism, to really understand what this is you have to maybe cast your mind back to at school, or even if you do science at university, and understand how you wrote up your reports at school or at university in terms of science. So what did you start off with? Aim, hypothesis, method, results, conclusion. That method is what's known as empiricism, or the scientific method of thinking. So you establish an aim of what you're going to try and do, what you're seeking to find out. You establish a method so that you can test something at various conditions to record the various effects, and then you record the effects in results. And based upon those results that you tested, you conclude. So what we find is that science is very good at establishing facts, or establishing close enough to facts in terms of what can be testable and observable. But when it comes to things which are not testable and not observable, then science has a difficulty to actually prove it. As an example of this, thoughts. How can science prove thoughts? You can prove that chemicals, neurotransmitters as they're called in the brain, they move from one synapse to another synapse, from one neuron to another neuron, an electric pulse is given. But how do you prove thoughts? You can't, because it's intangible. As another example to this, for example, if you saw a painting, science will tell us what the painting in terms of its materials is composed of, what type of colours are used, what is the reflection of light at a specific wavelength and a specific energy of the various colours. But science will not be able to tell us that a painter existed. So what we find, therefore, is that science has a limited role. And in terms of belief in a creator, science does not have a role in regards to this. Because a creator, which is, if a creator exists, would be beyond the universe, i.e. beyond that which is testable. So as a result, it is beyond the capacity of science. This then leads us to the second methodology of thinking, which we call rational thoughts. Now, rational thoughts is a thinking process which is built upon 4 components. So any thoughts that any individual has is built upon all these 4 components. Number 1, the reality. Number 2, the senses that sense the reality. Number 3, the distinguishing mind. And number 4, the previous information. So what happens is that when you sense something, for example, if I was to sense this bottle, then I would look at it, I would sense it. I would then transmit that to my brain. And my brain would then link it to previous information or previous coded information of this bottle, such that when I come across this, I say it's a bottle. Now, if I was to say to some of you, what is the hippocampus? You won't know what I'm talking about. Or maybe some of you do. Yeah? Because if you don't have the previous information to know what that reality is, you won't be able to interpret it. Similarly, if a person is blind from birth, how can you describe to them the colour red? You can't. So therefore, the thinking process is built upon these 4 components. And it's these 4 components that gives us the conclusion that thoughts exist. That gives us a conclusion that a painter exists because we can sense the painting. Or gives us a conclusion that somebody must have done this PowerPoint presentation in order for you to be seeing the PowerPoint presentation. So therefore, rational methodology is the basis of our method to establish the belief in the Creator. So what is the proof? Our starting point has to be the reality then. As we mentioned, this is the basis of rational thought. So when we observe anything in the universe, whether it is water, whether it is alcohol, whether it is any other objects which exhibit mass, we find that they share, all of these things within the universe share certain definable characteristics, or they share certain definable relationships with other matter. What we mean by this is that water has a specific temperature, 100 degrees Celsius, and it has a freezing point, 0 degrees Celsius, whereas alcohol has 70 degrees Celsius. So although they look the same, we can distinguish between the two because one has a different effect at the same conditions than the other. Similarly, we find that mass, or objects with mass, exhibit gravity. So all that we have seen, whether it's liquids, whether it's solids, whether it's mass, whether it's energy, all have definable characteristics. So what we find then is that whenever we look at anything or everything, that everything is limited in size, mass, shape, energy, etc. And there is a further characteristic of every limited thing, which is that it's dependent. I is dependent upon something else or something other than itself. So these are 2 primary basic points, which is that if everything exists in a limitation. And because it is existing in limitation, it is dependent. And perhaps by an example, I could help illustrate this point. Imagine, for example, the computer screen, or you're seeing here the projection. So we see that the projection has a particular size, a particular shape. It required a particular amount of energy to produce the light to hit this blackboard. The energy that it got, or it was dependent upon, was electricity. So electricity is what? Is a particular voltage of electrons moving from a region of high negativity to a region of positive. It has limitations as well in terms of its voltage, the amount of energy that it can produce, the conductivity of the wire as well. We find that the energy, or the electricity, is dependent upon generators. You know, power generators, you know how they work. They have a magnet, and then they have a coil around the magnet, a metal coil, and the magnet rotates, or the coil may rotate, which produces electricity. So if you didn't have generators, you wouldn't be seeing this. You wouldn't be seeing this image. And certainly if we had a power cut, the first thing we'd say is that who switched off the electricity? So therefore, when we further go back, when we look at the generator, we find that the generator itself requires steam in most cases to generate it, to generate the spinning. The steam came from the coal, if it was the coal, or obviously previously in Britain there used to be a lot of coal mines, so it was the coal. So it used to be the coal that burnt, or that produced the steam from the water. If we look at the coal, we find that it's also dependent upon something else, i.e. the organic mass 1 million years ago or so that fell to the ground, compressed under certain conditions, certain limiting conditions that produced coal. We find that that organic mass, let's say it's a leaf itself, was dependent upon the sun for its sunlight, photosynthesis, if you remember that. So what we find is that everything we point to depends, or is limited, and by definition is dependent upon something else. Whether we look at the sun, we can talk about hydrogens fusing together, or we could talk about why does that occur, because of the mass that is taking place from the center, from around the sun to the center of it. We can also explain how this gravity, where did this material that produced this mass that came together came from. We can talk about nebulas, gas and dust that is floating around in the universe, which comes together under gravitational force. And we can talk about where does nebulas come from supernovas, stars that blow up and explode and produce this material. So everything we see is limited, and everything limited is dependent. This leads us to certain conclusions that we can make, or certain possibilities. Possibility number one is, does everything limited upon or dependent upon everything else go on for infinity? What we term infinite regression. So does a limited thing depend upon another limited thing that depend upon another limited thing forever or not? And that's why I've given a diagram of dominoes. I don't know if you can see the dominoes. And I want you to try and visualize this in your mind. I want you to think about, for the last domino to fall over, it has to be hit by the domino before it, yes? Yes. And for that domino to fall over, it has to be hit by the domino before that as well. But if the rows of dominoes go on forever in the past, infinitely, would any of the dominoes fall over? No. Do you see that? Because in order for the last domino to fall over, it has to be hit by the previous one. But before that can fall over, it must be hit by the previous one. So therefore, in order for us to actually see this image, there has to be a first cause. There has to be a starting point. Meaning that it could not have been a case that the image was produced by dependent upon electricity, that depended upon generators, that depended upon coal, that depended upon organic matter, which depended upon the sun, which depended upon nebulas, going on, stretching for infinity. It has to stop somewhere. And where it stops, we Muslims, we call this the Creator. But some of you may say, hold on, I remember my GCSE science. And I remember this water cycle. And in the water cycle, they said you have a perpetual existence of water. Because look, if you see, you have water, the water evaporates, and the water evaporates and then condenses to form clouds, and then the clouds rain that produce water, which then goes back into this cycle. So could everything exist like that in our reality? And I want to give you like a practical, or a theory that they give today, which is, the Big Bang, the Big Crunch theory. I don't know if you heard of it. It's quite well known, quite popular, which is to state that the universe started at a Big Bang and then exploded out, or imploded, whichever way you want to look at it. And then at a certain point, the expansion rate slows down under the force of gravity. It comes back together into a big crunch. Yeah? So it gets to that point, or that singularity, and then it explodes out. And that this has been going on forever. So therefore, there's like a water cycle going on here. Now I want you to look at this and think about this by this example of A, B, and C. Now, if we take any points of A, B, and C, and we ask the question, what does it depend upon? How does it come into existence? We would say that for B to come into existence, it first needs A. And for A to come into existence, it first needs C. But C does not come into existence until B comes into existence, and B does not come into existence until A comes into existence, but A is still waiting for C. Does anything come into existence? No. So therefore something has to initiate a cycle. Therefore, what we find is we come to the conclusion that in order for there to be something that initiates the cycle, it can't be something from the cycle or something from the universe. Meaning, anything from the universe will become measurable, i.e. limited. If it's limited, it is dependent. If it's dependent, it's dependent upon something else. Therefore, this thing must be outside the universe, or what we term beyond the universe, because we don't think outside the universe there's more space, but we say beyond the universe. And so this thing, being the first cause, being unlimited, would therefore be independent. So for Muslims, we say that there has to exist, because we see in reality things which are limited, finite, dependent, there has to exist something unlimited, independent for things to exist. Otherwise we fall into the trap of cyclical dependency, where nothing exists, or we'll fall into the trap of infinite regression, the dominoes, where nothing exists again. So there has to be something independent. The question then becomes, can this independent thing, or is this independent thing something that was forced to create, which is what we term apersonal, meaning that it doesn't have any intelligence, it was forced by certain set procedure, by certain set laws, or did it choose to create? If we say it was forced to create, what are we saying? We're saying it's limited by certain definable properties. Therefore, it's no longer independent, it's dependent upon those laws. And the natural question is, what's it dependent upon? Goes back, and we find ourselves falling into infinite regression. So therefore, it has to choose to create. For this independent, unlimited creator to choose must have two further things: a will and intelligence. And really, that's what, as Muslims, we can come to, and that's what any human being can come to from the reality, that there exists an independent, unlimited creator who has a will and intelligence. What is it like? What is the essence of that creator? What does the creator look like? We cannot know. Because at the end of the day, we don't fall into the trap by personifying the creator as human attributes. So we don't say creator or God is like superhuman. Yeah? We don't say that, he is a person with, the famous Michelangelo picture on the Sistine Chapel of the big bearded, white bearded old man sitting on the cloud. We don't say this. Because why? Because we say it would contradict our understanding of it being unlimited. Therefore, when we look at the Creator, we have to come to this conclusion, and that's it. And we don't try to philosophize about the essence of the Creator. Similarly, just as a very brief example, brief point to this, imagine, if you will, you saw a painting. You know a painter exists, but what colour eyes the painter has, you don't know from the painting. It's a self-portrait. So, therefore, we don't go beyond what our mind can rationally justify. And this leads us to the final point, which is what the Quran the book of the Muslims, it says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. It says, declare that Allah is one. I, the Creator, this independent, unlimited, self-sustaining power is one. Allahu Samad, that Allah is self-sufficient, meaning independent. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, neither He begets nor was He begotten. Wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, and none and nothing is comparable unto the one. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله والحمد لله رب العالمين.